I now have 2 tubes of fabric with the seam pressed open and serging on the inseam, as well as the side seams. So what we're going to do now is what is called the crotch seam. We're going to sew this curve. To do this, we're going to take one of our pant legs and we're going to turn it right side out. The other pant leg we will leave inside out. And then I've got the back and the front in this corner, front and back in this corner. I've got a wide notch wedge here, wide notch wedge here, skinny notch wedge here, skinny notch wedge here. I'm going to take this and I'm going to slide it inside of my tube of pant leg so that those two U's line up with all those spots, including the middle seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the notch on this side, making sure I only have one layer of fabric. I'm going to line up those notches and I'm going to pin it and work my way up to the top. I'm the boss. I only have 2 layers of fabric. Right sides are touching and I pin them together. And I'm going to work my way around this U. My next step is right here in the center. I'm going to make sure these 2 center seams line up and both of these are open to either side. I'm actually going to put a pin on this side to keep that edge of the serging open, and this side. I went through all the work of ironing those and serging those open. I'm going to make sure they stay open while I sew this curve. And I'm just going to keep working my way around. Next things that line up are my 2 notches here. This curve is a little tricky to sew, so feel free to add extra pins there if you need. So what I have now is a complete tube of fabric with only the 2 layers from the 2 back corners to the 2 front corners pinned together through the U, making sure the center lines up and my notches. I'm going to sew this now just through these 2 layers as a curved seam. Now I'm going to sew this U-shape seam coming from this edge down around the curve and back up to this one, only going through these 2 layers of fabric at a time. The rest of it's going to be out of the way, and I'm going to do it at a nice even 5/8 seam allowance. Do not forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Up to about here it's pretty easy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this over, pull this down, and like shift this up a little bit. So I've just got another bit of straight line to go. Well, slightly curved. And I'm just going to shift this down a little bit. So this is kind of sticking straight up in the air a little. Just go slow and careful. Make sure your curve is a curve. When you get to this center, make sure your seams are still pressed open. Double pins work well for that. This point, the actual legs of my pajama pants are out the back, and I'm coming up to the front. I now have the crotch seam sewn through just these two layers. It's still a tube, 5/8 inch out and around and back. What we're going to do now is we're going to sew what's called a reinforcement row stitching. It's in case, as I'm moving, because this is right between the legs, if I accidentally pop this row of stitching, I'm going to have a second row in here so that if it pops, it doesn't completely come open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here at this notch, back stitch, and come around to this notch with a back stitch. And I'm going to be sewing this at 3/8 seam allowance instead of 5/8, so it's a little bit closer to the edge. So I line this up at 3/8, do a bit of a back stitch, and I come forward.